Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. And today we're having a Safa Sunday. Of course, my partner in crime, the most beautiful Miss Safa Bernal.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic and wonderful day. I know I am cozy with a cup of coffee, ready to talk about some books. And for those of you who like cyberpunk and mythpunk literature, I am your Safa. You can check me out at safaburnell.com or safaburnell.ca.
Yes, people, last week we end our Poetry Month because now we are
Yeah.
on the month of May. Ah, so
How?
fast.
How did we get to May already? I don't understand.
But the month of April, people, we do celebrate Poetry Month. So if you missed our episode, please do go back and listen to Miss Bernal poetry. Oh.
Such a wonderful month. I love Poetry Month. I'm like, yes, all the poetry. Let's talk. Could talk
we're
forever
gonna
about poetry.
yes, we're gonna do this again next year. Oh,
It's
April
beautiful.
Poetry Month. We're gonna read all the best of the best poem in the world.
Get ready.
So, Miss, yes, so Miss Bernal, what will be our topic for this month?
So, this month we are talking about fantasy and the different kinds of fantasy and the subgenres of fantasy that are starting to come up bigger and better and more vivacious, rather than just the high fantasy slash D&D type fantasy that we've been seeing for a very long time. There is still a place for that. Obviously, high fantasy is a big thing and it is a big genre, but there are a bunch of little subgenres of fantasy that are starting to pique people's interest and take their corner of the market share. And I cannot wait to discuss some of them because they are tons of fun.
Lots of fun and tons, people. So, Miss Bernal, what defines a fantasy novel?
In a fantasy novel, we are usually either not in this world, we're in a completely different world, or we're in an alternative world in comparison to this one. So you could still get things like my series, The Judge of Mystic Saga, which is mythpunk. It is more of an urban fantasy. And so you have places like Vancouver, you have places like Phuket, Thailand, but it's with magic and with some form of fantastical element. So either magic or some form of spirituality, some form of deities, gods, fae. You've got angels versus demons, you've got vampires, you've got werewolves, you've got fantastical elements outside of our normal spiritual experience here on the planet. And
Mm,
sometimes with that, that means that you're doing a lot of incredible world building and really making things quite unique. Fantasy is a long-standing genre that goes back from taking its influences from folklore and from various mythologies across the world. If you want to know more about the history of fantasy, I have got some information on my website, safaburnell.com, and another series of blog posts about some of the origins and cosmogonies that build our fiction. So,
yes, if you can see our screen, people, this is the website of Miss Bernal. It's something else. So do please do visit it. So, Miss Bernal, how do authors use world building to create immersive and believable fantasy settings?
the first thing that a world builder needs to do when they're building something believable is they need to have some form of consistency involved. So, if in order to boil a pot of water, let's say in our world, usually what people do to boil water is put water in a tea kettle or in a pot, you know, put it either on the stove or, turn on the kettle and wait. And then, temperature rises, all of a sudden we hear the whistle or we see the bubble, we see the steam coming up from the water, and we have boiled water. We apply heat to water and we use some form of technological means or some form of fire. And so that's the kind of consistency in our world. And, if we think of things like steam powered engines and things like that, it still goes back to that very simple application of heat plus water equals steam, and then you can capture that steam and do whatever with it. But there's a consistency there. In order to boil water, you have to apply heat to water. There's nothing else you can do. Say we go into a fantasy world where, in order to boil water, somebody needs to petition some form of minor water spirit for 72 hours.
72 hours.
Let's say in this fantasy world, it takes 72 hours to boil water because you have to petition this minor water spirit or this water deity. And if they're not feeling capricious, they may or may not listen to you. They may or may not take that little sacrifice. Well, in that kind of world, we're not going to see a lot of steam power. We're not going to see a lot of people with a hot cup of coffee. We're not going to see a lot of tea drinkers. You might see some cold brew guys because they're like, yeah, well, we don't need heat for that. It's like, oh, good for you. But the entire world can change with that one little thread plucked and moved. And so when you're looking at world building for fantasy, what you want to do is you want to build consistency in the differences. And if it takes 72 hours from that water spirit in order to get them to allow you to boil that water, then all those places that you would normally heat up water, all of those processes in life, like dyeing cloth, laundry, like cooking, how many people actually get to eat soup? Well, soup is probably for either the religious or the super wealthy because they've got the time and the luxury of being able to petition certain water spirits. What happens there? All of a sudden, you've got to have incredible consistency. And maybe there's a character in this water spirit world that's always seen with a hot cup of tea. Well, does that mean they're particularly blessed? Is that, a foreshadowing of some form of connection they have with a water spirit? What is it? And now there's your story. There's your investigation. What's going on? And so you need to pull that consistent thread and see if this one thing changes, how does it change the rest of your world? How does it modify the rest of everything so that people escape what they know now? Because the thing with a lot of fantasy readers is, basically with a lot of readers in general, we're so used to the way our world works, or we're so used to the way that literature works in a larger sense, especially things that we read all the time. Like if you're a huge Lord of the Rings fan, if you're into high fantasy, then, dwarves, they live underground, they live in mountains, they mine, and they, work with metals and different things like that. Well, if all of a sudden you're trying to say that dwarves live on treetops and they've never touched a hammer in their lives, well, you're going to have to fight with the consistency that most people see in themselves and most people see in their experience with fantasy. So again, you need to make sure that that consistent strain of something maintains itself and you don't leave any chinks in that armor for somebody to be like, but hey, on page 34, somebody else did something completely different. And you're like, whoops, that was from an earlier draft. And you can't say that because you need to be able to just put your work out there and hold on to it and see it either thrive or fail. So
Yes. So, what role of mythical creatures play in the narrative of fantasy novels?
depends on the fantasy novel. It can have everything from incredibly major roles all the way to things that were mentioned once in passing as somebody went by a museum. I think there's tons of novels out there. There's tons of tropes about, the Pegasi, flying horses, or Sphinx, or, magic snakes kind of going through the grass. You've got different kinds of dragons. As part of We Aren't Dead Yet, which is another podcast that I do every Thursday, we did an entire episode on dragons and dragons in various folklore. And so with something like a dragon, well, if you're going with a Eurocentric or kind of Western idea of folklore, or even a Levantine view of folklore and mythology, this dragon is a symbol of chaos. It's this symbol of entropy. It's this dangerous dinosaur-like monster that needs to be slain, that is damaging everything. And throwing people out of a sense of order that only society can bring. That's what a lot of the Eurocentric, the Western, and the Levantine kind of ideas of dragons are, all the way into the Enuma Elish when we get to the goddess Tiamat, who turns into a dragon when she basically gets rattled that her kids have killed her husband because he went, "That's it. Your mother wants peace and quiet. And if you don't give me some peace and quiet, I'm going to end you." And they went, "Oh, yeah." And they killed him. And then she went and turned into a dragon and started just completely destroying everything. So all the way from that image, thousands and thousands of years ago, to now, in the Western case of a dragon, you were seeing a sort of reversal of that now. But that sense of chaos is still what dragons were, where in more of an Eastern tradition, we have this sense of dragons as the keepers of wisdom, as weather and water spirits, as, depending on where you're from, that dragon is the source of rain and the source of plenty for your crops. And, there's this idea in martial arts of mastery in martial arts as the dragon holding the pearl. And the pearl is the dragon's wisdom, this thing that they are fostering to teach their students who are worthy. And so you have a completely different take on dragons in more of a Asian paradigm, and kind of like an East Asian paradigm as well. And going down into other places like Thailand, there's a lot of really interesting stories about that sort of nature spirit wisdom kind of thing that you get. And so you can have even that one dragon mean multiple things in a story. You just have to quantify it. And then you've got to either keep it consistent with what you do, or you need to subvert expectations in a way that an audience can find believable within the narrative of the world itself.
Yes, I think dragon is the most famous mythical creature that everybody want to, right?
Oh, yeah.
But before we go on, Miss Bernal, we want to shout out our listeners in United Kingdom, because in England we got 82% audience share, Scotland at 12, Wales at 4, and Northern Ireland at 2%. Thank you, United Kingdom, for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers, authors all over the world like Miss Safa Bernal. So, Miss Bernal, do you wrote a fantasy novel, right?
Yes. So my Judge of Mystic series is myth punk. It's kind of contemporary fantasy. And you've
Yeah,
got the
Charanash.
first two right here, Charanash and Son of Abel. So I use fantasy elements in what people might recognize as a sort of take on the modern world. And then I also have within that Judge of Mystics, landscape, within that world build, I have created multiple kind of interdimensional realms. And that way I can say that all of these different mythologies, all of these different pantheons, they all exist. All of them
Yes.
exist. They just exist in different dimensions that can only connect through the world tree and into Midgard, which is our world, our human existence world. So I have a lot of fun with that, because it means that I open up the world building to eventually go to incredibly diverse and different places. And, we do have plans within the Judge of Mystics world build to collaborate with different authors as we go along, as we go through. My concentration is mostly on Norse and Sami and Hellene and Middle Eastern folklore, because those are the folklores that I know the best as a mythologist. And then when it comes to certain other folklores that we're bringing on, I am going to eventually be bringing on some co-conspirators to really bring authenticity to the prose. So
So,
I'm
Miss
excited.
Bernal, how did you explore the themes of good versus evil in your novel?
I have a very firm take on good versus evil. I'm not a huge relativism kind of person when it comes to a lot of things. Murder is wrong. There are certain things that are just wrong. There are certain universals that I do stand for as an ethical and moral person, and that is very much reflected in the nature of my work by decisions that certain people make. Not to say that characters can't be gray. Absolutely, characters make good and bad decisions and decisions in the middle all the time, but I absolutely have villains that have negative motivations. And even though, the character of Stana is my main villain in the Judge of Mystic saga that I'm working on right now, and in her eyes, her motivation is good. She's going to cleanse the world of all deities and make sure that the humans are only for humans. But she's doing that by killing incredible amounts of people and by attempting to kill gods. So obviously, this is a villain. Her motivations may be, in her mind, some form of perversion of something potentially good, but it is the sort of negative reflection of that idea of, it's time for humans to kind of go out on their own and discover ourselves instead of holding back with a whole bunch of traditions that were given to us by great 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 grandparents 3,000 years ago. But she does not do good things. She does not make good choices. I think for me, you'll always be able to know who the villain is because they make the negative choice in a situation. And the heroes, although they might struggle with those choices and they might struggle with how to get there, they will, like Caleb, he will come to the good decisions. He will come to the decisions that are the most ethically just. And for me, that's kind of important. It's something that was important in literature for a very long time and then faded off with modernity and postmodernity in literature. And I really do like knowing who the villain is, even if the villain is, a sense of the system, even if a villain is society itself. But I do want to know, and I do want to be able to defeat the villain and have the hero be able to go home and have a good life at the end of it. So that's what I do. And that is a sign that for the third or fourth time today, we've lost connection. Everyone, thank you so much for being part of Book 101 Review. I really appreciate being able to have these Safa Sundays with you. We've been having some technical difficulties today, and they are quite awful. I think we just lost Mr. Lucas. I think he just ended up off and away. So I am going to say to everybody, if you would like to read more about my books and more about my take on fantasy, and next week we're going to be talking about cozy fantasy in particular, and what is up with cozy fantasy, what is it, why is it important, and why is it coming around a little bit more, then I would love to have you join us next week for Safa Sunday, and we are going to discuss that. And if you'd like to know more about my books, please visit saphaburnell.com. That is SAPHABURNELL.com. You can get my books everywhere books are sold. You can also go to your local public library and request all of my books, including Char and Dash, Son of Abel, Usurper Kings, and Neon Lieben. You can find me on social media at Usurper Kings, and I hope everybody has an incredible week and a fantastic day.